Welcome to the AngelsWin.com podcast, featuring Geoff Stoddard and AngelsWin.com founder, Chuck Richter. And now.
Well, I am neither Chuck Richter nor Geoff Stoddard. My name is Adam Dodge. I'm filling in for the guys as they embark on their spring training journey. I think those guys are in Tempe and Vegas or somewhere hot in the desert, taking in some Angels baseball, drinking cocktails and beers, having a blast. Very special episode of the AngelsWin.com podcast today. We are joined by my brother-in-law, which under most circumstances would not be exciting. I just, luckily for baseball fans and Angel fans, my brother-in-law is a notable person in the game of baseball. Please welcome John Coppolella to the AngelsWin.com podcast. John, great to see you, man. It's been, I think, since the holidays. I know we've talked since then, but happy to have you on the podcast, man. You look great.
Thank you, Adam. No, same here. Glad to be here. And yeah, really excited to be a part of this.
Now, we spend most of our episodes on this podcast breaking down the Angels, and usually there's a negative spin to that. At least there has been for the last, 5, 10, 15 years at this point. We're going to keep things a little more general today. Certainly there'll be some Angels content, some things that we want your thoughts on. But you know, you've had an incredible career to this point in baseball. I think you offer a perspective to fans that we don't really get a peek into so much. Obviously, you reached the pinnacle of this life as general manager of a major league team with the Atlanta Braves before that. And we want to kind of get into all of that. But, I know you love baseball, and I'd like to start there. Like, what were you like me? Was it baseball cards and having, the Braves and the Cubs and the Angels and the Dodgers on TV every day when we were kids? Tell us about your introduction to the game of baseball and what attracted you to it.
Yeah, it's probably very much like you, Adam. I think with my dad came here from Italy in early 1978. My mom was actually 4 months pregnant with me when they came back here. She was from here. She went to Long Beach State, and we were living in Garden Grove, and I was born July of 78. And my dad didn't speak word English when he came here, and he worked 3 jobs. And one of the jobs was actually parking cars at Angel Stadium. So like we would get in to the games for free late. And, I remember as a very young kid just being around the Angels. And there were some pretty good Angels teams, early 80s, mid 80s. I got my first job at a baseball card store when I was 8 years old. I used to put flyers on cars. I'd sort cards. I'd work the cash box. I'd do all that stuff. And I just love baseball. I think, Adam, you were probably a better player than me. I was not a good player. I couldn't hit. I couldn't run. And I couldn't throw. So, I had a lot of love for the game, but I was not good at the game. So, I was a pretty good student, and I thought there could be a path to be a part of the game, maybe working in baseball front office. So when I was a freshman at Notre Dame, I wrote 150 letters. So it's almost like pre-email time. 150 letters to all 30 big leagues, AAA, AA, high A, low A teams looking for a summer internship in between my freshman and sophomore year. And so out of those 150 letters, I got back like 8 form letters saying we don't do summer internships. This is like the mid 90s. So there was one team that wrote me back. There was a guy, Brent Bosnanski, Notre Dame class of 94. He was the director of operations at Lake Elsinore Storm. To that time was actually the high A for the Angels. So there were some pretty good players came through from the Angels at the time. I believe both Molina brothers, a couple of bullpen arms. I remember there was a pretty good player there too, Larry Barnes, who was a first baseman, maybe a little bit older, but man, he could really hit. So yeah, I worked that. So let me back up. Brent got back to me and said, look, if you're home over winter break 96, I'd love to show you around. So for where my parents lived, it was about an hour and a half drive. So they live right off the 5 freeway. So I'd take the 5 to 55 to 91 to the 15. This was before the 73 was built.
So
Uh,
you were avoiding Ortega Highway then at that
oh,
time.
for sure. Like you'd hear all the stuff about, they've got, different, different mountain lions and stuff. And
Mountain
there is stuff
lions
going
and
on there. Like I
motorcycles
didn't want to
do
get
yeah.
stranded there. If I get stranded on the 5, the 55, 91, or the 15, I'll be fine. If I get stranded on the Ortega, who knows?
Yeah.
So
For those of you listening who aren't from Southern California, there's like almost there's like this mythical sort of component to the Ortega Highway, which connects Orange County to Lake Elsinore. And so John strategically decided to take the long route, but definitely the much safer route when he was working for the Lake Elsinore Storm. So you get this internship with the Lake Elsinore Storm. I remember, I think I had been to one game at that facility, and it was when Vladimir Guerrero was with the Angels, and he was doing a rehab assignment there. Not a glamorous facility by any means. So what did you do as an intern for, a minor league, not even a minor league franchise or a minor league team, but, an A-ball team? Like what was your role? What was your responsibility with that
sure.
organization?
So let me back up for 1 second. The stadium there was built in 1994. So when I went there in winter of 96, this was like state of the art. Like in 1994, it cost like $35 million. So this is better than half the big league ballparks at the time. And I was
Wow.
blown away. And I basically begged Brent if I could work for free. And I got a second job at a Golden Baked Ham store, the one that's basically right by where my parents live, which no longer exists. But so I loved it. And this park was beautiful. Like it was hard not to fall in love with that ballpark. I told Brent, I'll do anything that you all want. So I would cold call, try and sell tickets. I'd actually drive tickets out. I helped with ushers. There were a couple times I was actually Hamlet, the sea serpent mascot, which was weird because he had this huge head. And if you pushed him forward, you basically flip because the head weighs more than the bottom. And it was also kind of
You
gross.
wait, you actually were the mascot a couple
I
of
was it
times?
twice because the kid doing it, there was like a local junior college kid who was like 20 or 21. He was sick one day or he couldn't make it. Something happened. So like I was the youngest guy in the front office and they asked me and I would always say yes to pretty much anything I was asked. And it was gross because it was like all his sweat and stuff. So, but you got to do it. I went in there. And also during the summer in the desert, it's hot as hell. And you're in this mascot suit and it's just like brutal. So, but you did it, you get through it, you take a cold shower and you're good to go. But yeah, I mean, I would do pretty much anything. It was, really fun being there. Sat in on a bunch of meetings, brought up different, um, you know, uh, different things we could do at the park. Like I helped out tickets. I helped out, really across all different departments. And
You
they
got
asked me,
dirty.
huh?
Yeah. You got dirty. It sounds like you got
Yeah.
dirty.
Yeah. Just tried to learn. I mean, I was very thankful to Brent to just get that opportunity to be somewhere that was so fun, and, so they asked me back the following summer. I actually got paid that summer of
Nice.
98, which minimum wage in California was $4.25, which was good because I didn't have to work at the ham store so I could pay for car insurance and gas and tolls. Um, but, it's something where I went back. I had more kind of a set job there. I ran all the different usher meetings. If there was any kind of problem in that uh, stadium, I would kind of lead it, lead just solving the problem. If it got really big, then I'd go to our GM or to Brent. But really just trying to, learn about it. And following that year, I talked to Brent who at that time I think was the assistant GM or GM, Kevin Hockian, who, was a great man, and he just passed a few years back. It was really sad. Great guy. And they both said to me, look, it's clear that you really love this, and we can bring you back next summer. Like, if you want to work here full time when you finish school, that's great. But we may be able to help you out with our parent club, the Angels, if you have any interest in that. So I had a ton of interest. One, you're getting to work with a big league team. Two, it's about 20 minutes from where my parents live. So it'd be a much easier drive. You're in the big league. So they hooked me up in the summer of 1999. So I was basically floating between baseball operations and media. So like the two guys I worked the closest with were Bill Bavasi and Tim Mead, who were both wonderful people. I mean, they're both great. And Tim is somebody, he was a assistant GM for a few years. And you talk about somebody that's really bright, that's really caring, one of the best bosses I've ever had, one of the best people that I know. And, unfortunately, summer of 99 was not a good one for the Angels. We had just signed Mo Vaughn, and I think the team lost 100 games or close to it. And I think Bill parted ways with them in October of 99. So I was kind of back to square one. I had 3 years of summer internships. I worked as a football student manager at Notre Dame, which was really cool. But, as like I was there, whatever I didn't win scholarships, I was there on loan, so it was like I'd find a job when I graduated so I could start paying back loans and help my
Yeah.
family. So yeah, there were a few job offers I had. I chose one with Intel. And it was great. At that time, they were really big, and they've kind of come back lately, but they were a really big name at that time. And, for me as somebody who grew up paycheck to paycheck, to be 21 years old and, to get an offer that's six figures, stock options, a big sign-on bonus, was really cool, so
Oh, it's
I
the
signed with
dream,
them.
right? The American dream. The American dream,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, kind of, right? So, I signed with them in January of 2000. I was graduating in May of 2000, and I got the signing bonus when I signed with them. I started spending money. It was the first time I ever had any money in my life. So I take my friends out. It was great. Like I felt like I'd pay them back for the past 3 years where I was always broke. Um, but it was, you know, something where for some reason in March, probably right around spring training, I just thought to myself, I want to take one more shot at baseball. I'm going to write to the 30 big league teams only. That's it. I'm not writing any farm teams. It was great. My time on the farm, I really liked it. If I'm going to leave this job, the only I do is for a big league opportunity. So I write these 30 letters. I don't really hear back from anyone. And then a week before graduation, a guy named Dan Matheson, the director of baseball operations for the New York Yankees, calls my dorm phone. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have a pager. Called my dorm phone. If I had graduated 10 days later, I never would have got the call. I didn't have a phone. There was no way to reach
Right.
me. So he called my dorm phone. Part of me thought it was a prank. Part of me thought it was my friends, calling from somewhere else. You don't have caller ID at that point. So you just, I took the call and, as Dan talked more, I could see it was not a prank because he knew things my friends wouldn't know. And we talked about, they had an internship in Tampa, Florida, which is where their scouting player development complex was. George Steinbrenner was their owner. He was at that complex 5 to 7 days per week. Everything ran out of Tampa. So he talked to me about that. Dan and I had a bunch of conversations. We were driving to New York, which is where my mom's from. And each stop, I would get out, put money into a payphone and call Dan and just talk to him more. And we never made it to New York. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, we turned south because I got the job and just went to Tampa. And so I started working there about a week after I graduated. I had to pay back the part of the sign bonus I spent at Intel. which took some time. Um, the job with the Yankees was $18,000 a year. Um, but, look, for the same reason I wrote those letters, I felt like when I was 30, 50, 70, 90, I didn't want to look back and wonder what if. So, I felt like if I wrote those letters one last time and tried, it just wasn't meant to be. And, that's okay. Um, so I went down there, and I started out as a intern. And, you know, the way I've felt about it and the way I feel about a lot of things I do is, worry more about the process than the outcome and just do whatever you can control. I feel like you can control how hard you work and the effort that you put forth. So, what I did as an intern, I didn't have keys to the complex. So, found out when the first person came in. That was actually Rob Thompson, was our director of player development. He's now the Phillies manager. And it's great for Tom's. He's a great guy, really, really cool, and he's done an awesome job for them. Um, but Rob would come in every morning at 4:45 a.m. and he would hit the gym from 4:45 till 5:45. He'd be at his desk, ready to work 6 a.m. every day. So since I didn't have a key, I would show up early, so Rob would have to let me in. So I showed up at 4:30 every morning. And then I waited till the last person left. And I was always doing work. I was reading books. I mean, I'd help on the field. It's kind of like when I was a intern for the Storm where, you do any job. And, I wanted to, you know, uh, one, I was so grateful to be there, but two, it's like, I don't ever want anybody to think like, hey, he's too big for this or he's too good for it. Like I was willing to do anything. I tried to help out each person and, they hired me full time as a baseball ops assistant in 2001. I got promoted to assistant director of pro scouting in 2003. Um, and then the Braves hired me away as their director of pro scouting and baseball administration in late 2006.
Awesome, man. And I love that story because I feel like in our culture there are people that, feel like they're, disadvantaged when oftentimes I think there's just a lack of understanding of what it takes to achieve things that you want to achieve, and to hear you say, "Hey, I did every crap job imaginable for years, and was willing to do that and wanted to do that." And, the process, as you mentioned, and not the outcome, it was a long process for you, but that process ultimately landed you an offer with the Atlanta Braves. So how did you're with the Yankees, you're with the most storied sports franchise in the history of the world, I would argue. Um, was there a path for you with the Yankees, or did or was the opportunity with the Braves too good? Talk a little bit about, how that Braves opportunity came up and what your decision process was like to leave one organization for another.
Sure. So, when you work in baseball, it's not a 9 to 5, right? Like I had told you a story about showing up at 4:30 and, I didn't show up at 4:30 every day once I got the job, but I was still there pretty early. And following the workday, I would go scout games. I'd go scout high school games, college games, um, Florida State League games, which is high A. And it was really right across the street. So as I was out scouting these games, I got to meet a bunch of scouts and, team front office leaders. And I knew some people with the Braves. So Dayton Moore got the Kansas City Royals GM job in late 2006, and he brought a lot of Braves people with it. So the Braves needed to backfill some of those roles, and Dayton brought a lot of people with him. So I think they were looking outside the organization. It's kind of crazy. So I would never leave work early. Just it's probably me being more OCD than anything. But I left early, like one day in early October. Like we were in the playoffs already, and it was actually my wife Cheryl lived in Gainesville. She got her master's at University of Florida, which is where I later got my MBA, but she was actually working for the school, and we've been seeing each other for like a year, and I just drive to her on the weekends, she'd drive to me, and then during the week it was like 20 hours a day baseball, basically. So I left work early to go ask her to get engaged. And I'm like 10 minutes into the drive, and it's about an hour 15. And I get a call from Yankees GM Brian Cashman. And so, like I did a lot of work for Cashman. It was rare if he would call me directly, usually call the people that I work for. And he said, "Hey, I got a call from John Sherholz. Braves have an open director of pro scouting, director of baseball administration role, and you're one of the people they want to talk to." And I said to Cash, I'm like, "Whoa, I had no idea. What do you think I should do?" He's like, "Go. Like look, even if you don't get it, it's great to go through this process and just kind of, see what it's like." And he said, "If you do get it, it's a job that we don't have here. So, it'd be great for you." So he was great. Cash has always been awesome. Um, and so I got up there. I asked Cheryl to get engaged, like right by where we had our first date, all that stuff. And then I told her, "Hey, look, random, but in a week I'm going to be driving to Orlando, because the Braves were there for their fall instructional league. So this is like mid-October, season's over. A lot of the young players, I'm sure, it's obviously the same way with the Angels in Arizona. So, the Braves are in their off-season meetings down there. That's where they're holding those interviews for the job. And I told Cheryl, "Look, like, you know, there may be some in the Braves, probably less than 5% chance. Like, I don't know anyone in the Braves front office. It's good that this happened. I'm going to try my best in the interview, but like, I don't know that's going to lead to anything." So, we both kind of just laughed it off and, uh, had a good night, So, um, I go in for the interview a week later, and I guess I was the last one in for the interview. And as I was driving back from Orlando to Tampa, sitting on I-4, which is all of Central Florida sits on I-4. I basically got a call back from the Braves where they made me that job offer. Like my heart was racing. It was one of my favorite moments. And, my first call right after that was to Cheryl, and she was like, you know, pretty floored too. And, I joined the Braves a week later. So
Exciting, man. And you spent many years with the Braves. And you can. I mean, I think you started right director of pro scouting, and then to director of baseball operations.
no, I moved up to assistant GM in 2011, GM in late 14. So, something where, the Braves, you get a chance to work with people like John Trills and John Hart. I mean, it was, Bobby Cox was, and is still, one of my
Three
favorite.
Hall of Famers, right?
Yeah. I mean, you know, all three great people, and I mean, they helped me a great deal. You know, Bobby Cox, I mean, I could think back, even when I wasn't working with the Braves, Bobby would check up on me like almost every week, and just such a good heart, such a good man, such a great baseball mind. And I mean, he's one of my favorite people in the whole world, you know? Um, yeah. So, the years I was with the Braves, we were good for a while. In fact, from 2010 through 2013, we had the second best record in baseball over those 4 years. The best was actually Yankees, which is where I came from. But all those years of winning kind of caught up with the Braves. And in 2014, we had a really tough second half. And when you looked up, you had 800 innings leaving. You had free agents, Irvin Santana, Aaron Harang, and you had injuries to Mike Minor and Chris Medler. we didn't have anybody in the farm system we felt could really do it. Our three best players were Freddie Freeman, Jason Hayward, Justin Upton. Freddie had just signed long-term earlier that year. Jason Hayward was a year away from free agency after 2014. Justin Upton was also a year away. We just announced we're moving to a new park in 2017. We didn't, have the money to sign these guys long-term. And had we kept them in 2015, even when we shot the moon in free agency, we're maybe a 500 club. So, um, as I talked to the people at the Braves, to, senior leadership, owners, it was, look, I know the Braves don't rebuild, but we need to take a step back to take 2 steps forward. And, you know, I think maybe a month after I got the job, we traded Jason Hayward to the Cardinals. Jason Hayward and Jordan Walden, who was former Angel, for Shelby Miller and Tyrell Jenkins. Shelby was our lone all-star in 2015, 205 in the third innings, 305 ERA. I think he had the worst run support in the NL that year, but just pitched like a champ throughout it. And, we got an offer for Shelby that we, could not refuse. Dansby Swanson, Andrew Ciarte, Aaron Blair. So we traded Shelby the following year, but Shelby Miller was really good for us. He's the kind of pitcher you want to grow with. It's a first round pick. It's a top 10 prospect. It's somebody who had thrown 600 innings. By the time he was 24 years old, he had made playoff starts. Just a great person too. And, Shelby Miller is somebody that I really admire in a lot of ways because he went to, by virtue of the trade, he ended up in Arizona and had a really tough go of it, but he's built himself back and he's pitched like 10 or 12 years in the big league since. I really admire that perseverance that he's shown. It'd be really easy. There's a lot of people, I think, that just kind of quit when things go wrong, but Shelby, to his credit, has pushed through and, he's been in the big leagues a long time and, he's been a part of some good teams and, played big roles. So, yeah, we were not looking to trade him. People ask me all the time, was there something you saw in Shelby that made you want to trade? No, he was really good. There was nothing that led us to trading Shelby except we got such a good offer that, we thought it would be a, franchise changing trade. And I think it was for us.
Was, right? And so, yeah, and I think that's a good segue because, I think a lot of solid baseball people that I've talked to, obviously this is, a few years after you left the Braves, but the Braves won the World Series in 2021. And you get a lot of credit for being the architect of that team. And it sounds like, it started with that decision to rebuild the Braves. And so, a couple of questions related to that. And you bring up the Shelby Miller example is great because, I want to tie this into the Angels, right? The Angels, in my opinion, I think a lot of people's opinion, and I think nearly objectively it can be said that they've sort of avoided a rebuild that should have started years ago. I know you and I, in our personal conversations, said, look, 2022, the Angels had the opportunity to trade Shohei Ohtani for, the haul of all hauls potentially, right? They decided not to do that. And then they decided not to trade him again the next year, and they end up getting nothing for him. Um, Going back to when the decision was made with the Braves to do a rebuild, and what understanding that there are different, there are different avenues by which to add talent to your organization. There's obviously the international market, there's the amateur draft, and then there's the ability to trade stars, which you've kind of talked about. How did you guys prioritize? How does that work? I guess in a front office, right? If you understand, and if there's another avenue to get talent, like let me know. But just understanding international draft trades, like how does it work in the front office in terms of determining how you guys are going to approach that rebuild?
Yeah. So, there's no set plan, right? It's not like, hey, we're going to do 33% trades, 40% draft, 27% foreign. There's nothing like that. The way I would look at it is every day is an opportunity to get better. Every day is an opportunity to add talent. You could sign a minor league free agent. You could do a waiver claim. You can make a trade. You could get a draft pick in trade. I remember during my 3 years as a GM, the 5 draft picks trade, and we got 4 of them. So, one of those draft picks turned into Austin Riley. One of them turned into AJ Minter. One of them, I think, turned into Joey Wentz. I mean, it's something for us where you're constantly looking to add talent. My directives were don't lose 100 games and just hit budget. So, basically, I want us to get as much young talent as we could and, take chances for the right reasons. I felt like there were a lot of, kind of safe college player drafts for the Braves. We went back to when you look at the way the Braves were built when they went on the run in the early 90s, a lot of young upside high school talent, guys like Chipper Jones, Steve Avery, like that group. And we kind of got back to that. I remember in the first draft in 2015, first 4 picks were all high school. And the 5th was a college pitcher who had Tommy John surgeries after the year. Mentor. So, I think for us it was just, taking the viewpoint of what's the highest upside player that you can get that's not, look, I don't want somebody who has 80 home run power, but is going to strike out 2 of every 3 at bats. There had to be a chance for big league success. There had to be real playing carry twos. That being said, we're always going to bet on tools, always bet on upside. And, that's what we did in these trades and these drafts. We talked about the Hayward trade. The Justin Upton trade happened a month later. It's actually on my son's birthday, which is random. But we traded for 4 minor league players. All 4 of them reached the big leagues, and the league god was Max Fried. And again, when we were in the room, there were a lot of people pushing for different pitchers. I think we had a really good chance at Max Fried for a couple reasons. So Fried obviously was the number 7 overall pick in the 2012 draft. SoCal kid as well, I think that AJ Preller took over as Padres GM late in 14. AJ didn't draft Max Fried. There was not that, I guess you call it, emotional attachment to him. He didn't draft him. He didn't sign me and take all the photos, like with the parents, or do all the media with him. And also, Max Fried had Tommy John surgery in August of 2014. So he wasn't going to pitch at least till 2016. When you're trading a player like Justin Upton, who was one of the best high school hitters to come along in, 10, 15, 20 years, and the lead player you're getting back is a pitcher who hasn't pitched above A ball, who had Tommy John, you're not going to see for a year and a half. That's a tough pill to swallow. But, I got to give credit to, the Braves senior leadership and that they were willing to take that chance. And they let me make that trade. We could have gotten a few other players. I won't say who, just because I don't feel that's right. But we could have gotten, there was one other player that we talked about a lot. And, I love Fried. There were a few reasons. One is I'd sit in every Braves draft meeting. In 2012, he was number 2 on our draft board behind Byron Buxton, who went number 1 that year to the Twins. Our scouts thought this was Cole Hamels plus, really, really good stuff. Chance to, look, it wasn't going to be in a year, but when he got figured out, he'd be really good for a really long time. Great athlete, just a great person, and he has been. We also hired a scout who worked for me as a special assistant to the GM, Chad McDonald, and Chad drafted Fried when he was with San Diego. We actually hired him from San Diego months earlier, not thinking that we would get Max Fried in trade, but Chad had drafted Fried, knew the kid very well, and he was also somebody that kept pounding the table for him. So that helped make my job easier, just
Sure.
because Chad knew the kid and Chad loved the kid. So, and the 3 other players we got, Malik Smith, had a good run for 4 or 5 years. We actually flipped him in a deal to get a huge lefty out of Seattle, Luis Gohara, who, as my time with the Braves was ending, I saw this guy put together some starts that, uh, just special stuff. I mean, like 97, 99, and just, um, but, it's like the old saying, tin stat, there's no such thing as a pitching prospect. Um, Not all of them work out, some turn to Max Fried and some don't. And, but yeah, just with, Malik Smith played for 5 years. Jace Peterson was in that deal. He's played parts for about 10, 12 years. The fourth player was Dustin Peterson, and he, played up and down for a few years too. So for us shedding that, 14.5 million that we owed Upton, getting back 4 prospects that we could grow with, um, it was a deal that it's hard to swallow in 2015, but you love what it means for you in 2016, 17, and going forward.
Sure. And then, when you're doing that, when you're going through that process, I imagine at that time, particularly when you look at the Brave success spanning a couple of decades, right? I mean, that wasn't going to be a popular thing with the fan base. So early on in that process, was there, from your perspective, was it not fun to be around the city and hoping you don't get recognized and things like that by fans out and about?
You know, Braves fans, I love Braves fans. Braves fans, I think, knew it was time for a reset, maybe the way that our senior leadership got it messaged. Um, but I mean, I had fans come up to me if I was in the airport, or if I was out eating, saying that they love what we're doing, um, and that, they want to build something special. The biggest thing for us is, you wanted to build a team that was capable of winning a World Series every year. I felt like we had teams for a while that were good teams that would finish over 500. If it all broke right, maybe we could get there. But, knowing we're on borrowed time, losing Hayward, losing Upton, not having prospects coming, it just felt like time. So, look, it's not fun trading away really good players, but we were so excited about the talent that we got back. And, I think we really pinned our hopes to it. There were a lot of people, maybe not so much in Atlanta, because I feel like for the most part, like the fans had our back and were really cool and, really dove into our prospects and really liked what we were building. Um, but I think with prospects, with young players, there's always question because there's not that certainty. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's about that process. Like, I want us to fail for the right reasons. I wanted to be on young upside players that could bring back what the Braves had in the 90s and early 2000s rather than, you know, kind of this 87-ish win team that would get knocked out in the first round, which is still really good. I mean, look, there are a lot of teams that would kill for that. Um, I just
I'd
thought
kill for
that,
that.
yeah, but it's, yeah. So, I mean, it was tough. Look, I think anytime you make a deal, there's a wonderment of, are these players as good as I think they are? And, you know, this is not AI. They're not robots. They're people. And you can make the right trade for the right player for all the right reasons and still might not work out, whether it's just where they are in life or what's going on outside their life, or maybe they don't fit in the city or that place at that time. Um, but, at the end of the day, it worked out very well with a lot of these players. They should get credit for it first and foremost because they're the ones that did it. Our coaches, player development staff should get a great deal of credit. They were all fantastic and did a great job and really bought all in. I mean, you're going through that rebuild and it's painful because the Braves are not a team that rebuilds, but you would really look to the farming stage just for hope. When you're getting blown out 10-0 in the third inning, but you see that you've got Max Fried with 5 innings, 1 hit, 1 walk, and 12 punch outs. You feel a little bit better, So that's kind of what helped us get through it. I mean, it was really tough. in some ways, and I could talk about more. I mean, I could talk about him for like hours about some of the different
Sure.
stories and things that we had to like go through. But, I will say this. I think the Braves fans were awesome and totally understood what we were trying to do. I'm glad for them that worked out how it did that, basically right after I left. They won the East in 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, wild card in 24 in the World Series. Of course, in 21, in which Max Fried pitched 6 shutout innings and Dansby Swanson hit a home run.
Awesome, man. It's a great story, and I think that experience and a lot of the things that you've talked about today, I'd love to have you back on when the amateur draft happens, of course, and maybe the trade deadline, and we can do a little bit of a deeper dive into how the front office approaches some of those things. So you're now you're separated from Major League Baseball, at least in terms of working for an organization. You recently joined the roster of writers at Baseball America. How did that come about? What do you? How often are you going to write? What sort of perspective are you going to bring to that role? Super excited for this opportunity for you, and love to learn more about it.
Yeah, no, that's very kind, Adam. Thank you. So just a real quick thing. I actually did help a team last year. I worked basically for the head of their baseball ops, and I would just go back and forth with him. I didn't work with anybody else from that team, and just kind of some trade thoughts, players I liked, I would send to him. If they were in trade talks, he might run something by me. I don't want to say the name of the team, but they're a team that made the playoffs last year. So that was really fun, and I'm uh, super thankful to that person for taking a chance on me. You really find out who your friends are when, you're in a spot like I was in. And that was really cool. So yeah, how did I get involved with BA? So um the baseball winter meetings this year were here in Orlando where I live. Um so I didn't go to winter meetings. The first winter meetings I've been to since 2016. Um, because, I didn't go in 2017 when, as I was leaving the Braves, and I hadn't gone since. But they were in my backyard. They were literally 20 minutes from where I lived. And, it's always tough. It's like, do I go? Like, do I go see people? Like, what are they going to think of me? Like, it's really nerve wracking. And I went for 2 nights basically. Um, I felt like I got hit by a train, like it was just like so many different conversations, emotions, just a lot of things where it was like, and it was great. I probably saw over 200 people that I knew. And, it's really cool seeing young people that I knew that worked for me at the Braves that have now moved up into higher roles elsewhere, and just seeing them doing great things and, seeing that they're still a part of the game is really cool. But one of the people I ran into was the Aaron Chief at Baseball America, um, JJ Cooper. And so I've known JJ for 25 years. I mean, we used to talk all the time. And I actually wrote about this. We used to talk over AIM text my
Oh yeah.
when you're on, I guess AOL Instant Messenger. And, so my job at the Yankees when I was the assistant director of pro scouting, super fun job, right? It was like where basically our scouts would write up players every night. And so like I would update every day somewhere between 200 and 400 um, new evals. So as a player, say we have a player ranked in, the basic baseball scouting scale is 20 to 80, 50's average. Um, so say we had a player in at like a 48, but then a scout just saw a player last night at like a 60. His fastball went from 88 to 92 up to 95 to 98. He's got, from a 45 curveball to a 70 curveball. As things change, it was important to me that we were updated every day almost as soon as it happened. This is back in the early 2000s, so it wasn't something that we could automate. But as I would go through this, I was it was a 600-page prospect list that I later brought to my Braves job interview. Um, but I'd slide players up and down every day. And so I would speak with JJ and with other writers about players. Be like, hey, like you just saw player X, like I heard he's 95, 98 now. Oh yeah, like he's this, he really changes, like tweak that. So it's like, you know, I wouldn't give out any secrets what we had. We just kind of double check homework answers,
Sure.
Um, and all those guys are on it, man. If you're on the site, BA, they're putting out so much great content every day and they're locked in on prospects. I remember, and I joked about what I wrote in that, in my first article. Like I had 6 prospect handbooks. Like I love that book. I read it cover to cover over and over. Cause for me, it was about, look, I didn't play. I don't have famous parents. I'm not super charismatic. But if I was the most informed person in that room, I could add value to that room. So
Sure.
I just kept reading, I kept learning, and I love that stuff. A lot of people that work at BA, I think, are the same way. I think that there are people that are constantly trying to learn more about players, people that love the game, people that love to see young players rise and take that big step forward. So, I'd known JJ for a long time and, I saw him at the winter meetings and we talked in a lobby for like at least 30 minutes, maybe an hour. It felt like 5 minutes. I mean, we went right back into talking through players and draft and trades. And I mean, that's stuff that I love talking about. And it was really easy and fun. And, I reached out to him a few days later and said, hey, look, I wonder if I could do something and be a part of what you all do because I love what you do. And, I've got this 20 hours a day for 20 years and, I'd love to help share and kind of do things like that. So, I've been doing a few other side projects like that too. So it had been pretty fun and just, you know, nothing that takes away time from my day job, but I don't sleep much as it is, and, if you're doing something that you love, it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah. Yeah, and you and hopefully I'm not spilling anything, but you actually did some work for the Philadelphia Eagles, I understand, right? In a
Yeah,
consulting role.
so for 3 years and, yeah, I worked for their GM, Howie Roseman, great guy, just far and away the best football GM out there, brilliant guy, great person, super down to earth, always searching, always trying to get better. I met Howie, in 2015. A lot of times different front office leaders from one sport will try and meet with different front office leaders from other sports. And so, I think he went to go meet with John Schultz and John Hart. I just happened to also be there.
Sure.
Um, but, I stayed in touch with Howie and he's just a great guy. And, he had some kind words for me when the Braves won the World Series in 2021. And we started to talk and, I just did a few projects for him. And look, I think what the Eagles front office does is I think they're the best front office in all of football. Kind of like with that baseball team, I dealt only with Howie. I'm perfectly cognizant of the fact that I'm one of 100 voices in his head, and he's going to go with his guys that he's in the fight with each day. But just to be able to like send him stuff and have a conversation every now and then was really cool. And it was great to see, they won the, 2025 Super Bowl. That was really cool. You know, um, it's really good. You root for the good people, and Howie Roseman's a really good person.
Yeah. There's been some executives that have I think there have been some executives in sports that have held roles in different sports, I think, right? But for the most part, guys sort of stick to their sport. So I guess my question would be, is there a skill set? I mean, there has to be, right? But what is the skill set that would allow somebody who has worked in a baseball front office, like what skills are you transferring over to a different sport that are gonna produce the similar type results?
So I think the value that I added to Howie is that I was different than everybody that works in football. Like I looked at it from a baseball perspective, looked at football problems through baseball eyes. So, you know, the things that I would bring up to him, and look, I mean, not everything was a slam dunk, I mean, and I feel like if there's, anything that I made him think about twice so he could check with his guys or like do things like that, then it's a huge win for him and for me. But I just look, I didn't get into football. I didn't start watching tape or, try to break down tools. I just said, here's how we would do it from a baseball standpoint. Having built rosters, having seen how rosters are built, having done that for 20 years, like here's what I would do, And I mean, I'm sure that a lot of it was like way off, but if there was some that helped him, that's a huge win. And, you just want to help the people that help you. But I mean, you know, I I think in any job, and look, I mean, since I left the Braves, when I left the Braves, um, I went to work in a totally different industry, vacation ownership, aka timeshare. And look, I've got to give a shout out to two people that made a huge impact on my life: Mike Flasky, Tony Walker. Um, Mike was somebody that I knew from the Braves. The Braves spring training was here in Orlando, which is like the timeshare world headquarters. This is where all the main timeshare groups are here. And Mike would come to the park a lot. He was actually friends with John Hart. They're both really good golfers. And so Mike would come to the park and I just got to be friends with him. Never in my life did I think I would work in timeshare. Mike was a really good college baseball player. He was a 3-time team captain, center fielder who could fly, who could hit, who could do a lot of things. He played at Limestone College. I actually played under Hall of Famer Gaylord Perry. And so Mike called me up a few months after things settled down with the Braves in late 2017 and said, look, I've seen what you've built at the Braves. I know what John Hart thinks of you. And, you know, um, I want to take that mind and bring it to timeshare. And Mike picked me and my family up and really gave me a shot, And the last person I had to meet was the person who's going to be my boss, Tony Walker. And I mean, like, how you just click with people when you meet them, like in
Oh,
the
yeah.
first 5 minutes, like it was just an easy click. And we just talked baseball, laughed. Really smart guy, really good person. Um, they're both really, really bright people, but really good people, and, I'm so thankful for them both, that they helped me and my family out at a time when we really needed it. Um, it was actually Mike and his wife, uh, you know, Mike and his wife, Corinne, who talked me into applying for reinstatement. Um, I had not thought about it. And after some of the stuff happened with Astros scandal, he's like, look, this might be a good time for you to think about doing this. And I mean, there were so many calls I had with him, Corinne, they were both, she's a brilliant lawyer, by the way. So she was able to help me out too. But Mike and Corinne had such a big impact on me getting, back into or just getting off the, permanently ineligible list. So,
Clearing your name, yeah, making it eligible. It's
yeah,
awesome, man. I mean, like, I think, you know, I think what you illustrate here is that, we are all impacted by so many different people in so many different points of our lives. And then all of those contributions sort of play a role in determining, who we become as people, as professionals, and things like that. I do want to jump subjects real quick, if that's okay. I see you're
sure.
wearing your Notre Dame shirt.
Yeah,
I know how much you love Notre Dame. I mean, obviously, it's a prestigious school. You graduated from there. I know how much their athletic department means to you, especially their football team. And Lou Holtz, I guess just a few days ago, had passed away. So, Obviously condolences to him. A great personality in the sports world. Curious, I know that he was there when you were there. Uh, do you have any Lou Holt stories? Would love to hear that.
So, first, like, I love Lou Holtz. When I was a kid, um, you watch Notre Dame on Saturdays. At that time growing up in the 80s and 90s, they were like one of the only teams that was constantly on. I grew up hating USC. I loved Notre Dame, Catholic kid, um, it just looked like such a cool place, and I mean, I remember that 1988 national championship team, and ever since I was a little kid, I had no ties to it. Like, my parents didn't go there. Beyond being Catholic, there was nothing that tied me to ND. It was that and being a huge college football fan. Um, and so I remember I was a sophomore. I was at a Model UN conference at UCLA during the game of the century against Florida State. And I remember we got back from the conference. I watched like the last half of the fourth quarter. And it was like you see these like gray skies and the fans are going crazy. And, when they bat down the pass in the end zone, Charlie Ward, like you're just like, man, that's where I want to go, and I was so fortunate. I've been very lucky everywhere, but I was really lucky to get into school there. It's a big part of my life. As you probably know, I go back every year, speak with a business ethics class, just talking about my own experiences and just not playing in the gray and, not putting yourself in a spot where others can, you know, have an impact to change your life, in a way that you don't want to change. A speech I brought my kids back for, but I care greatly for the school. Um, Hope and pray that my son, who's a junior, gets in. We'll see. Um, but Holtz was a big part of it for me. I mean, his press conferences were so awesome. I got 1 year of Lou Holtz, uh, 96, 97, and then it was 3 years of Bob Davy. I loved Holtz. He was somebody who, I think was very passionate. He would get in the face if somebody made the wrong play or did the wrong thing. He wanted to win, but I think that the people who worked with him were around him, whether it's players, staff, whomever, know that he cared greatly and that he loved the school and that he, you know, yeah, I mean, it was a sad day for me when he passed. I've always loved Lou Holtz. I thought he was a great coach and a great person. And, I'm sure he's in a much better spot right now.
Yeah, we're all gonna miss Lou. He was great. He was great on the broadcast and always had a lot of energy and certainly represented your university very well to the rest of the country. We do have to wrap up here in just a few minutes. I did want to get to some questions that were submitted to us. Obviously, you're Italian. Um, is there an Italian baseball player that you hold in higher esteem than others?
Yeah, I mean, probably Mike Piazza. And the reason why is this. So I did a little work last year with Team Italy as they prep for the World Baseball Classic. And I was working with a guy who at that time was their GM, Gianmarco Ferroni. Very, very bright guy, very talented, smart. He's doing some great things there. Their coach at the time was Mike Piazza. And I got a chance to like hang out with Mike. Ironically, his daughter is now a freshman at Notre Dame. Um, the small world continues. But I just think that, he was such a good player for such a long time. I think what's really cool with him too is he was like a 62nd round draft pick. So it's easy to root for underdogs. And, this is a guy who had to earn it every step of the way, and he just kept getting better and better. And, having the chance to spend a couple days with him last year and just see the kind of person he is, he's awesome. So yeah, he'd be my favorite.
Mike Piazza. That's got to be a common answer amongst the Italian Americans. Now, obviously, when you were with the Braves, maybe not obviously to everybody, but you actually hired Perry
Yeah.
Manassian, am I pronouncing that right? The current Angels general manager. You hired him in a role with the Braves. Can you tell us what he was hired for, and like what attracted you to him to the point where you would bring him into your organization?
Yeah, so I've known Perry for a long time. He's one of those guys that, he was out scouting. I was always out scouting. I'd see Perry a lot. I was attracted to Perry for a few reasons. We hired him as our director of pro scouting. What I liked about Perry, great person, great energy, great knowledge. Um, you know, uh, because of who he is and who his family is, Perry gets a lot of great information. So, Perry's brother Zach, obviously GM of the Giants. Perry's dad is a longtime clubhouse guy. Perry's other brother Calvin works in baseball. I mean, this family is awesome, and so I just wanted to, kind of bring Perry in as somebody who could really help us get info, give us a different way to think through players. Unfortunately, I only got 1 month with Perry, you know, but he was somebody that I always liked, and I think back to one day where um, I was in spring training. I brought my son with me. He was like 4 or 5, and you know, Perry and me and him ate lunch. It was a uh, 3 of us ate lunch at the Braves. We were at the Blue Jays spring training. They'd serve, I think, Boston Market every day there. And so, it was just something where I just liked Perry. And I thought he was somebody that would help make us better. And you try to hire people that are strong in areas that you're not. I felt he had some contacts and ties and get information way better than I could.
It makes a lot of sense. And um, I think let's see, we've got I think we're gonna save that. A lot of people wanna understand what it's like, during a trade deadline within a front office. We're gonna save
Sure.
that. We're gonna try
Yeah.
to have you back on during the season as we approach the trade deadline, and we'll do a deeper dive into that. Is there one baseball executive, from another organization that you just loved working with, like, that was easy to work with? Is there, like, who was one of your maybe there's a few, you don't wanna leave people out, but who are the best guys from other franchises that you got to work with?
Yeah, I mean, trying to think back to when I was doing it and who we made trades with. I liked AJ Preller because he was always down to make trades, and we made 2 big trades with him. One was where we got Freed and 3 other players for 1 year, Justin Upton. The other one was a spring training trade. It's actually gonna be in the next article I write for Baseball America, where we trade Craig Kimbrell and BJ Upton for, a few prospects and draft pick that turned into Austin Riley. But I liked AJ a lot because I felt like he was like me in that he'd be up till like 4 a.m. Um, he's a much better basketball player than me. It's painful to say that, but he's like really good. I remember I played with him. He had a 1 month suspension, whatever. Now it's probably 10, 12 years ago. But during that month, I think all he did was basically play basketball. He was like, one, he was totally ripped. Two, he was like, he could have played college basketball that day. He was that good. He was cutting, he was dishing, he was hitting shots. Like he's a really good player. So yeah, I mean, I always liked AJ a lot. I mean, really, the people who would talk to you, who would actually engage on trades. I mean, it's real easy to just not make trades and not take any risk. And I feel like, from the outside right now, there's less of the trades that were made 10 years ago being made now. There's less of these challenge trades. There's less of, people just kind of draft their players and sign their free agents and go from there. You don't see as much wheeling and dealing as there used to be even 10 years ago when I was in it.
All right. So on that note, we're going to close up here in a couple of minutes. So I've made the case, and you and I have not talked about this. So if I'm an idiot in this with this opinion, like please let me know. But I've made the argument that based on where the Angels are today as a franchise, having really maybe the worst, one of the bottom 2 or 3 farm systems in all of baseball, having a roster at the major league level that, is would take a miracle for them to contend this year. That if I were put in charge of the Angels, the first thing I would do is put Zach Neto on the market. And I love Zach Neto, and I think he's a tremendous player already. I think he's got a huge upside. I think he's everything you want in an on-field leader. But I also think he's the one piece that you have in the organization that could potentially bring you a franchise trading haul of prospects. So not to put you on the spot, but am I out of line in that thinking? Is that where your mind would go if you were given a roster that looked like the Angels and tasked with making them a contender in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, mine. So one, I don't think you're way off, but I do disagree with you. I would sign him long term. There
Okay.
was something where he made some comments, I think, at the start of spring that he'd like to sign long term. This guy's a 25-year-old shortstop. He got there really quickly, as do most Angels players. And he's done really well. I mean, I think he's a championship level player and somebody that you can grow with. And look, I mean, if he gets older and has to move off shortstop, he could still profile pretty much all over, Um, I think that for the Angels, Trout's getting older. When he's healthy, he's still a really good player. But I mean, for me, Zach Neto is your next face of the franchise type player. Um, so I would hold on to him. I mean, I would look to trade pretty much everyone else but him. And really, in some ways, I'm not saying he's Freddie Freeman because, I'm not saying he's not. We don't know who he is yet. But for me, Freddie Freeman was the best pure hitter in baseball during the years I had him at the Braves. And I made a quote, I wouldn't, I'd rather chop off my arm than trade Freddie Freeman. Like, as we were going through this, I wanted to grow around Freddie Freeman. And, I would meet with Freddie Freeman quite a bit, and just tell him the plan that we had. Say, look, this is going to be built around you. We have some really good young players coming. We're going to add some more. I think you can do that with somebody like Zach Neto, you know? Even if he's not a Freddie Freeman, he's still a really good player. The other thing is, you know, who do you get for him? I mean, you obviously have to listen on every trade all the time. If you get offered, you know, the best package ever, if you get offered, you know, that Shelby Miller trade, then yeah, you've got to trade him. Um, the one thing I will say is, I think there's less risk with Zach Neto and Freddie Freeman being hitters than there is with any pitcher, because when it's a pitcher, you're one pitch away from being hurt, and that's why I think pitching is the ultimate currency, because it's in such, like you can't keep it. You can never have too much pitching. Um, but
It's
I think,
always in demand, and it's
yeah,
and it's never dependable. Like there's
it's just
no
like fleeting. It's like fleeting,
yes.
But I
Yeah.
think with Zach Neto, you've got a up the middle player who's been really good. Obviously it's been some tough years for the Angels in the win-loss column. But he's still been a good player. Think about how much better he would be if he were in an even better lineup. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, 100%. And I don't disagree with you, right? I think the point I made was, they should have extended him a year ago.
sure.
Like we knew then, and it's the fact that they hadn't, and there had been no, at least to our knowledge, formal conversations about a long-term extension. I just see that price going up, and I was assuming that he'd probably want to get out of here. The comments he made recently about wanting to stay on, certainly encouraging, but I'm with you. If you have pitching that you can trade, um, that's obviously in demand. I don't see a whole lot of arms in the Angels farm system, but that's where we're going to close. So you're a prospect nerd. You're now a writer for Baseball America. You talked about your 600 prospect handbook, which I've seen that, by the way, or I saw that years ago.
Yeah.
It's an impressive monster of a publication. Looking at the Angels, obviously not a top farm system by any stretch of the imagination. Are there two or three guys in their system, maybe guys that people aren't talking about that you could point to and say, hey, these guys right here, these are guys that you guys should be watching?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing about prospects is that you never really know. We talked about Mike Piazza being a 62nd round pick. And, look, I would tell you if I were doing prospect lists, he would not have been the top prospect in the Dodger system at that time because he was older, because he was a late pick, because, you know, uh, a number of reasons. But he turned out to be a really good player. I mean, there are some prospects in the Angels system. Um, the great Paul Snyder was a longtime scouting director for the Braves, says, it takes 10 to get two when you talk about starting pitchers. And I used to always, the first time I heard that, I said to him, why wouldn't you say it takes 5 to get one? And he said to me, because that ninth and 10th pitcher might be the two. So it's, going back to pitching, there's, very easily 10 pitchers in the Angels system that you could like and that you think could be a big league piece. You know, which 2 or 3 might turn into that, you know, time will tell. But there are some players to like, obviously it took Tyler Bremner, number 2 last year. It'll be really interesting to see what he does this year when he gets a chance. Without getting into names, just because, I don't want to, I'm still helping a team. I don't want to get too much into it, but, um, I usually look at, a number of factors with pitchers. First, stuff and size, then two, like different stuff, uh, numbers, whether it's, all the different, pitch FX stuff, whether it's just kind of the old school, walks to hits to innings pitch, um, strikeout to walk ratio, ground ball, fly ball, home and road splits, are they getting better as the year goes on? I mean, there are some players in there. It's just, you know, so much of it is putting players in the right spot, whether you don't move them too quickly or you don't move them too slowly. And, so much of it is just the luck of them staying healthy. So not trying to like cop out of that answer at all. Um,
Sure.
but, it's just hard, like there are, uh, actually so my next article I'm sending in Thursday is about spring training, but the article after that, is going to be about one prospect under the radar that's in the Baseball America Prospect Handbook that I really like. So, I haven't done the work yet on the Angels, so I don't feel ready to like say that, but, I'm sure I'll have that soon. So,
So I'm understanding all of that, and I understand your need to not share too much information, and so when we look at the top 100 prospects, right? I don't know that there's ever a sure thing in baseball, obviously, particularly from a pitching standpoint, but there are some guys like Mike Trout was, a sure thing. I think Ronald Acuna Jr. was. I mean, it would have been incredibly surprising if these guys didn't pan out. But beyond maybe those 5 to 10 hitters, obviously we know about pitchers and everything can change with one pitch. Um, is it really sort of kind of a crapshoot? From maybe say the number 20 prospect down through, obviously there are guys that from a tool standpoint, you could probably look at objectively and say, okay, they're just filling a roster spot in the minor leagues. It's going to take a lot for this person to move up the ranks, but everybody else, great athlete, great tools, velo's there. If they can learn, put it together, develop, etc. I think, um, that's kind of what I heard you say is like, look, there are in the Angel system, there
yeah.
are players with the tools to succeed. It's a matter of like that development piece that comes next.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I think, the next frontier for baseball. You're seeing with a lot of teams where, if they can come in and get players better, find out which of their pitches lead to the best outcomes, what's the best swing path, launch angle, all that stuff, those are ways that they can help make players better. I think that scouts, front offices are really smart. They know who the best, top 100 players are. Oftentimes what makes the difference, and this is why I'm such a huge scout guy, is player makeup. It's funny. We talked about Trout. The year Trout was drafted, he was picked 25. He's right-handed hitting, center field, high school jersey. But I think that makeup is really important. I think if you look at the prospect handbook, and you look at the top 100 prospects, a lot of times the ones that make it versus those that don't, you'll see two things. One, makeup, but two, a lot of players that, you know, say out of the top 50, 25 turns really good players, 25 are, not as good or maybe get a cup of coffee. A lot of times with the same organization, which kind of goes back to that player development piece where it's like, if you keep seeing really good young players coming out of the same place, it's probably something that they're doing to help those players. Um, and, it's not, paint by numbers where you do the same thing for every player. It's something where, you've got to get it customized to that player to get the very best out of them. You've got to understand how that player fits on your championship team. It isn't, you know, every single player has to be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what I mean by that is a 1 or 2 starter or 3, 4, 5 hitter. Like there's still really valuable pieces that can do a lot of different things. It's just how do you get the best out of them? How do you put them into the best spot to be successful?
Sense. Well, we're going to end on that. John, thank you so much for joining me today, man. I really appreciate it. This is the first time, geez, I mean, we've known each other for what, 18 years now, 19 years now. This is the
Long
first time
time,
we've
man.
done one.
Yeah.
Long time. I thank you for that. I'm gonna
Same here.
do the outro here real quick. Look forward to doing this a couple more times this year. I think that would be a blast. Thanks again, man.
All right. Yeah. Thank you again.
Thanks for listening to the AngelsWin.com podcast with Chuck Richter and Geoff Stoddard. Until next time, go Halos.